A millionaire CEO tosses a single dollar at a freezing little girl playing violin on the street just to prove a point. But when she starts to play, he breaks down in tears. What he doesn't know is this girl carries a secret that will unravel everything he thought he knew about love loss and the family he left behind. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story, it's a deeply human journey about loss resilience and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances and the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now, let's begin. The snow had begun to fall just before dusk, soft heavy flakes drifting past the glass walls of Summit, 42 Lake Tahoe's most exclusive mountaintop restaurant. Perched high above the glittering Nevada Valley, the entire space shimmered in candlelight and luxury. Fireplaces crackled behind glass. Jazz music drifted like perfume through the air. Waitstaff glided across marble floors with the precision of dancers. Preston Hale, 41, founder and CEO of Hale Ventures, leaned back in his chair at the center table in the VIP wing. His suit, dark charcoal Armani, fitted him like armor. His tie, a silent nod to wealth, was pinned with a single onyx stud. Around him sat 4 top investors men whose names alone could shift markets. Champagne sparkled in crystal glasses, and their laughter echoed like currency. To another record quarter, Preston said, raising his glass. The others clinked theirs in response. From the outside, it was a picture of triumph, of power, of control, but then something unexpected caught Preston's eye. Through the frosted window, standing beneath the flickering orange glow of a street lamp, was a little girl. No more than 10. She wore a threadbare red coat too thin for winter. Her boots scuffed, and at least 2 sizes too small sank into a drift of snow. In her gloved hands, she held a battered violin, and she played. The sound was faint, barely audible through the window's double-pane insulation. But the movement of her bow, the tension in her posture, it was unmistakably deliberate, committed, real. Preston squinted, intrigued. "Looks like we've got local entertainment," he said, dryly, gesturing with his glass. His companions chuckled, barely glancing. Inside the restaurant's kitchen, Rosa Jennings froze mid-scrub. Her hands, raw from years of chemicals and steam, trembled slightly as she tilted her head toward the sound. She didn't need to look. She knew that was her daughter, Eliza, 10 years old, shy, curious, and astonishingly gifted. Rosa had told her never to play out there when it was snowing. But Eliza had insisted, "I can make people feel something." Mama, she had said one night after earning 3 crumpled dollars and a chocolate chip muffin from a kind tourist, even if it's just for a minute. Rosa wiped her hands, stepped quietly into the service hallway, and peered through the side of the dining room. Her eyes scanned the faces at the VIP table and landed on one that made her heart stop. Preston Hale. She hadn't seen him in over a decade, but she knew him. Knew what kind of man he was. Knew the bloodline he came from. And if he was watching Eliza now, it wasn't out of kindness. Moments later, a server appeared at the kitchen door. "Table 12 wants the girl brought inside," he whispered. Rosa's heart dropped. She pressed against the wall out of sight, watching through the arch of a marble pillar as the manager approached Eliza at the door. The girl hesitated, hugging her violin like a shield. The cold clung to her clothes like memory. Rosa wanted to scream, to stop it, but she didn't, not yet. Inside the restaurant, the guests made room. Eliza was ushered to the open space between their table and the fireplace. Preston leaned forward, pulled a $1 bill from his wallet and set it gently on the table. $1, he said. Show us what you've got. The room stilled. Other diners paused, forks suspended. The jazz trio fell silent. The only sound was the soft crackling of the fire and the heartbeat pounding in Rosa's ears. Eliza took a slow breath. Her fingers chapped and red gripped the neck of her violin. And then she played. Not a simple tune, not a nursery rhyme. Issei's Sonata No. 3 in D minor, raw, demanding, wild with emotion. Her bow sliced through the air with urgency. The melody filled the restaurant not just with music but with ache, with truth, with history. Preston's expression changed almost instantly. The smugness melted. His jaw slackened. His fingers, those same hands that built an empire, curled slowly around the stem of his champagne glass, now forgotten. Because in that moment, time bent. In that moment, he wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a name on a building. He was a boy again, standing in the hallway of a foster home, listening to his older sister play violin on her dying days. He remembered her hands, her coughing the last note she ever played before, collapsing into silence. He remembered the sound, not because it was beautiful, but because it had been honest. And now, here it was again, years later, in a mountaintop restaurant from the hands of a little girl in a red coat. Tears slid down his face. He didn't blink them away. He didn't speak. He simply listened. When Eliza finished, the room erupted. Not in polite applause, but in something primal. Shocking, cathartic, a wave of release. Preston sat still. Eliza looked down at the violin in her hands. She hadn't noticed how badly it was scratched. She hadn't cared. Behind the column, Rosa wept, quietly, openly. Her soul, which she had buried in dishwater and rent checks, was rising again. The investors at the table glanced at each other unsettled. They'd seen Preston close deals, crush rivals, manipulate with a smile. But now he looked cracked. A moment passed, then another. And then an older woman stood, elegant, commanding. Silver hair pulled into a graceful twist. Marianne Graves, director of the Sierra Music Conservatory. She walked toward Eliza, knelt to her level, and said only one sentence. "My dear, who taught you to play like that?" Eliza glanced toward the pillar where Rosa stood hidden. "My mom." And just like that, everything changed. A new door had opened, but behind it waited the past, silent, buried, and ready to be unearthed. Because Rosa knew who Preston really was, and she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Next, the secrets Rosa tried to forget, and the truth Eliza was never supposed to know. The applause still echoed in Rosa's mind long after the music faded. But for her, it wasn't just about the sound of clapping hands. It was the ghost of a life she had buried rising again like smoke through a locked door. That night, as she walked home beside Eliza, the snow crunching beneath their feet, Rosa felt her chest tightening with an ache she hadn't let herself feel in years. She hadn't planned on ever hearing Issei's sonata again, especially not through the fingers of her daughter. That piece had once been hers, a part of her identity. Back when Rosa Jennings wasn't scrubbing dishes or cutting coupons to make rent. Back when her name had graced the recital programs of Juilliard's most elite performances. Eliza didn't know any of that. She had no idea her mother had once been one of the most promising violinists in the country. Rosa had erased those chapters long ago, or so she thought. It started 17 years earlier in New York City, where Rosa, then 20, had been a rising star. Her performances drew whispers among professors, her interpretations described as storm and silk. She played with a ferocity that turned heads and softened hearts. Audiences held their breath during her recitals. Critics wrote about her like she was destined for Carnegie. But then came Sebastian Wilder. He was magnetic, a young conductor with charm and ambition in equal measure. Their chemistry on and off the stage was undeniable. Rehearsals turned into late-night talks, into long walks through Central Park, into love. Or what Rosa thought was love. She was 3 months pregnant when she told him. He didn't yell, he didn't cry. He just stared at her and said, "That's not part of the plan," and walked away, just like that. Just like she didn't hear from him again. The next few weeks blurred into one painful decision after another. Rosa pawned her Guadagnini violin, the one her grandfather had given her when she was accepted into Juilliard. The strings still carried his fingerprints. She used the money for medical bills and rent. She dropped out quietly, left the city without telling anyone. No farewell concert, no goodbye to the stage, just silence. Years passed. She gave birth alone. Took any job she could find. Housekeeper, waitress, finally dishwasher. All to raise a girl who smiled in her sleep and reached for sounds before she could speak. Eliza. The daughter who didn't know her mother had once made music that moved thousands. Rosa didn't want her to feel the burden of what could have been, so she tucked that life away like folded sheet music in a drawer never opened. But Eliza had the music in her blood. Rosa never taught her formally. She couldn't afford lessons, let alone a decent instrument. But she found an old violin at a yard sale one summer, cleaned it, restrung it, and placed it in Eliza's hands. What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Eliza played. Not perfectly, but with feeling, with fire. Rosa taught her what she could, late at night, in whispers, in broken fragments. Never about her own past. Only about posture, about letting the music breathe through you, about listening before playing. Eliza absorbed it all like sunlight. And now she had stood inside a room full of millionaires summoned by $1 on a table and brought them to silence, to tears. Rosa had watched it all, frozen behind a pillar, pride and grief colliding like a storm inside her chest. Later that evening, a woman approached her in the parking lot outside the restaurant. Marianne Graves, regal, poised, her eyes sharp as her tone was gentle. "Your daughter is exceptional," she said. Rosa stayed quiet. She deserves the kind of training that can shape this raw brilliance into something lasting. At Sierra Conservatory, we can offer her that, full scholarship. All expenses covered, room, board, everything. Rosa still didn't speak. "I'm not asking you to give her up," Marianne continued. "I'm asking you to let her step into the future she was born for." Rosa looked away, her eyes burning, because she had once heard those same words, and then lost everything. That night, Rosa sat at the edge of Eliza's bed and watched her sleep. The girl's face was peaceful, her hands curled like she was still holding a bow. She thought about the first time she held her own violin, the feeling of the strings beneath her fingertips, the way the world disappeared when she played. She thought about Sebastian. He never knew he had a daughter, and Rosa had made peace with that, or so she believed. But earlier that day, as Eliza played, Rosa had seen a man at the VIP table. The one who cried, Preston Hale, Sebastian's half-brother. She hadn't expected to see him again, not like this. Not as the man who placed $1 down and challenged her child to perform, but he had changed. She saw it in his face, in the tears he didn't bother to wipe. Still, Rosa couldn't forget who he came from, what kind of world he belonged to. And yet, as she brushed Eliza's hair away from her forehead, something inside her softened. Maybe this wasn't just about music anymore. Maybe it was about healing. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She walked quietly to the door and found Marianne again holding a small folder and a warm smile. "I know it's a lot to process," she said gently, But talent like this doesn't come around often. I'd like you both to visit the conservatory next week. Take a tour, meet the staff, no pressure." Rosa looked down at the papers. The letterhead gleamed gold beneath the porch light. Sierra Music Conservatory, the place she was supposed to go, the life she was supposed to have. But this time, maybe the path wasn't hers to walk. Maybe it was Eliza's. And maybe, just maybe, Rosa still had a role to play in it. The first morning at Sierra Music Conservatory broke with a promise of possibility. Rosa stood just outside Eliza's dormitory watching her daughter carry a violin case that now felt heavier than ever because it wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a bridge between where she came from and where she was going. The transition wasn't seamless. Eliza had never lived anywhere except beside her mother. Now she shared a room with another student, a violinist from Seattle named Kayla, who practiced 6 hours a day and talked in musical jargon Eliza couldn't always follow. At first, she felt like an imposter. Everyone around her had studied with private instructors, played in competitions across Europe, spoke of Bach and Paganini as if they were relatives. Eliza had learned in a kitchen between Rosa's work shifts with a second-hand violin and no metronome, just intuition and memory. But she held her own. Theo, a shy cellist from Boston with thick glasses and a love for Chopin, became her first real friend. They practiced together in an empty chapel on campus where the acoustics made their duets sound like something out of a dream. He taught her music theory in exchange for the emotional nuance she seemed to summon so naturally. Their friendship blossomed over sheet music and quiet confessions. He told her he once froze on stage and forgot his entire concerto. She admitted that sometimes she still heard applause in her head from that night at the restaurant, and it scared her because she didn't know if she could live up to it. Meanwhile, Rosa had taken a part-time job in the student services office, answering phones, sorting records, and keeping her distance. She didn't want to smother Eliza, but sometimes after a long day she would stand in the hallway and listen to the faint sound of her daughter practicing. And it reminded her of something she had tried hard to forget: the sound of herself. Then came the package. It arrived one rainy Thursday, unannounced. A violin case, custom-fitted, handcrafted leather with her initials embossed in gold. Inside, Eliza found her same old instrument, cleaned, polished, and gently restrung. A new shoulder rest. Spare strings. Even sheet music holders made of soft suede. There was no name attached, only a card, no strings attached. Rosa knew instantly who had sent it. Preston Hale. It rattled her. She wanted to believe it was a gesture of goodwill. But she'd lived long enough to know that even the softest offers could have sharp edges. Still, Eliza was thrilled. She ran her fingers over the lining like it was velvet from a fairy tale. "He didn't try to replace my violin," she said to Rosa that evening. "He just gave it a better home." Rosa didn't argue, but the war inside her deepened. Weeks passed. Eliza threw herself into composing her first original piece, which she titled First Snow. It carried fragments of her life, rising scales like laughter, descending chords like silence, a waltz that hinted at the night she played beneath the street lamp. Theo helped her refine it, adding harmony beneath her melody like scaffolding under stained glass. Then, one night, everything changed. Eliza came back to the dorm late, her eyes swollen, her hands trembling. She held her violin case like it was a wound. "Someone broke it," she whispered. Rosa rushed to open the case. The bridge was snapped in two. The strings were shredded. A jagged crack ran along the front plate like a scar. It wasn't an accident. The message was clear. Jealousy had found its way in. Rosa reported it, but no one could prove who had done it. The school promised an investigation, but in that moment, justice wasn't what Eliza needed. She needed to know she could keep going. That night, Rosa watched her daughter sleep this time without the usual peace. Her hands twitched in her dreams as if still playing. Rosa sat at the desk in the corner, opened her old notebook from Juilliard and began copying out one of her earliest compositions. She remembered writing it during a winter break, snow falling outside her dorm window back when music was still her first language. Now she wrote it for Eliza, because music like love sometimes had to begin again. And in doing so, Rosa began to heal something in herself, too. The next morning, they met with Marianne Graves. The school would cover the repairs, of course, but Rosa wanted more than restitution. She wanted resilience. She wanted her daughter to understand that life would always try to test her resolve. Eliza stood quietly as Marianne listened. "You have a choice," Rosa said gently. "You can let this moment define you, or you can define it." Eliza didn't answer right away. But later that afternoon in the practice room, she began again, with an old violin on loan from the school and a new fire in her chest. Sometimes bridges break, but the music they learned can still carry you across. It was a gray morning when Preston Hale showed up again. Not in a suit, not behind tinted glass or flanked by assistants. He arrived at the conservatory's entrance with a violin case in one hand and something in his eyes that Rosa hadn't seen before. Hesitation. He waited in the lobby, fidgeting with the latch of the case until Marianne Graves walked him to Rosa's office. She didn't look thrilled, but she didn't stop him either. Rosa had agreed to the meeting, not because she trusted him, but because something in her had shifted since the night Eliza's violin was destroyed. He placed the case on her desk gently, like it held something fragile. "I brought this for Eliza," he said, his voice quiet. "It belonged to my sister." Rosa didn't move. Her arms were crossed, her eyes sharp. "She was the only person I ever saw cry when she played," Preston continued. "She taught herself to play on the street. Never had formal lessons, just instinct." He opened the case. Inside was a Montagnana violin, over 200 years old, with varnish that glowed like amber. It was clearly valuable, but it wasn't flashy. It looked loved. Played. "She died 5 years ago," he said, eyes fixed on the instrument. "Ovarian cancer. She asked me to make sure this ended up in hands that understood why music matters." Rosa's breath caught. Not because of the violin, but because Preston wasn't performing, he wasn't selling. He was remembering. "I know how it looks," he added, the dollar on the table. "The suit, the business card, I know it was all wrong. But I've been trying to build things my whole life. Companies, towers, deals. Nothing ever moved me the way your daughter's music did that night." Rosa said nothing. Preston finally looked up. "I'm not trying to buy your forgiveness, or hers, but maybe this can help fix what someone else broke." He left the case and walked out. That afternoon, Eliza opened it slowly. Her fingers hovered over the varnished wood like it was holy. She didn't ask where it came from. She just lifted it gently, placed it beneath her chin, and began to play. The sound was warmer, deeper, but the soul inside the music, that was hers. Weeks later, the conservatory announced its winter showcase. Eliza was chosen to close the program, a rare honor for a first-year student. Her composition, First Snow, had evolved into something layered and haunting, stitched together with the sounds of her childhood. The quiet moments with Rosa, the tears she'd hidden after the sabotage. Rosa, meanwhile, had returned to practicing. Not publicly, not yet, but in the stillness of early mornings in the quiet sanctuary of an empty studio, she began to find her hands again. Her old notebook, filled with annotations and bowing reminders, came back to life. One day, while practicing a Bach partita, the door creaked open. Eliza stood there barefoot, cradling hot cocoa. "I didn't know you still played," she said softly. "I didn't either," Rosa whispered. They played together that night. And it wasn't perfect, but it was honest, like laughter in the dark. Then came the letter. Mary Ann delivered it in a sealed envelope, her face unreadable. It's a courtesy notice, she explained, for faculty and students involved in the winter showcase. One of the guest judges has confirmed. Rosa opened it. Sebastian Wilder. She felt her knees weaken, but she didn't fall. She had spent years trying to erase his name from her life, and now he was walking straight into the one place she had built for her daughter to be free. When Eliza read it, she looked up slowly. "He's my father, isn't he?" Rosa sat down. She didn't deflect, didn't change the subject. She nodded. "He doesn't know about me," Eliza said, not as a question. "No," Rosa replied. "It was my decision, not yours, and I don't regret it. I only wanted you to feel loved, always." There was a long silence. "Do you want to talk to him?" Rosa finally asked. Eliza shook her head. "I want him to hear me." In the days leading up to the showcase, Eliza poured everything into her piece. She didn't change the notes, but the tone of it shifted. There was a new edge, a quiet strength. She began the final movement with a phrase Rosa used to hum when she thought Eliza was asleep. It was no longer just a composition, it was a reckoning. Preston sent flowers before the concert, a note tucked inside that read, "No matter who's in the audience, play for the girl who started on the sidewalk." Theo brought Eliza a lucky charm, a small piece of rosin shaped like a heart. Rosa gave her a hug so tight it hurt. "You already won," she whispered. "Now let them feel it." The night of the showcase, the theater was packed. Critics from national publications, patrons in tailored coats, students in black and white nerves humming through the corridors like electricity. Rosa performed first. It was her first public stage in over a decade. She played a modest piece, her own, something intimate. And when she finished, the applause felt like forgiveness. Sebastian sat in the second row. He clapped politely, no recognition in his eyes, just appreciation for the music. Eliza was the last to play. She stepped onto the stage in her simplest dress. No makeup, no sparkle. Just the Montagnana violin and a quiet resolve. She didn't look at the judges. She didn't bow. She just began. And every note was a message. Every pause was a question left unanswered. And every crescendo was a voice saying, "I am here, I am yours, and I am enough." When it ended, there was no applause at first, just breathless silence. Then a standing ovation. In that moment, Eliza wasn't just a girl from the sidewalk. She was a voice, a storm. And even the man who tried to erase her from his future felt the weight of the music he could never undo. The snow had started falling again the night Eliza stood on stage, but this time it felt like it belonged there. Like every flake was a part of the story she was about to tell. The conservatory's main hall glowed in gold and soft amber rows of patrons settling into velvet seats. Cameras were rolling. Critics scribbled into notepads. The program listed her name, Eliza Jennings, in bold under the final performance slot. But to her, it was never about being last. It was about being ready. Backstage, Rosa tightened the clasp on her daughter's shoulder. She didn't offer advice, didn't give a last-minute tip. Just a simple kiss to the forehead, the same way she had every night since Eliza was a baby. It was enough. Theo gave her a thumbs up from the wings. In his lapel, a sliver of red ribbon, the same one Eliza used to tie her old violin case. It reminded them both of where they'd started. The lights dimmed. The announcer's voice faded, and Eliza walked onto the stage. She didn't smile, didn't wave. She looked out into the sea of strangers and knew somewhere in that crowd sat a man who had never claimed her. A man who once walked away before she even had a name. Sebastian Wilder sat in the fourth row. Legs crossed, hands folded, a blank expression, masking something heavier. Eliza lifted the Montagnana under her chin, took one slow breath, and began. The first notes of First Snow fell gently soft as breath against glass. The melody tiptoed into the room like it was afraid to be heard, but soon it grew, layer by layer, courage rising from caution, echoes of lullabies, streetlights, frosted windows, late-night practices on borrowed time. Then came the shift. She stopped playing, just for a beat. The silence cracked open the room. "I wrote this for the man who never stayed," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady. "I don't need an apology. I don't need answers. I just wanted him to know. I found my own way." Gasps stirred. Chairs shifted, but Eliza didn't flinch. She returned the bow to the strings and carried the piece forward, not angry, not broken, just whole. Rosa, watching from the wings, wiped a tear with the edge of her sleeve. It was the sound of everything they'd survived, and everything Eliza had become despite it. The final passage, pulled from a tune Rosa once hummed while folding laundry or waiting for soup to boil. Eliza had woven it into the finale without telling her. But Rosa recognized it instantly. It was home. When the last note faded, there was stillness, then thunderous applause, the kind that shakes ceilings. People rose to their feet. Even Sebastian, though his clapping felt restrained, almost unsure. He didn't approach the stage, didn't speak. He just stood, then quietly slipped out before the lights fully returned. Eliza didn't notice, or maybe she did, but she didn't chase him. She had said what needed to be said. 2 days later, Rosa found a letter in their mailbox. The envelope was thick, the handwriting unmistakable. She opened it in the quiet of their kitchen, the winter sun cutting across the table. It was from Sebastian. He wrote of mistakes, of regrets he hadn't admitted to himself, let alone others. He said he had watched his daughter perform and felt the music speak a language he no longer knew how to understand. He didn't ask to be part of her life, didn't seek forgiveness, just thanked Rosa for choosing courage over bitterness, for giving Eliza a name, a future. Rosa read the letter twice, then she folded it and placed it in a small wooden box beneath her bed, the same one that once held recital ribbons, old strings, and now the notes of a life she never expected to return to. Eliza never asked to read it. She just asked one afternoon if Rosa would go for a walk. They wandered through the snowy hillside behind the school, silence between them easy like breath. At the overlook, Eliza unpacked her violin. She didn't say a word, just played, no stage, no audience, only her mother, the sky, the wind, and in the distance behind the pine trees, a dark car paused briefly, engine humming, headlights dimmed. Preston Hale watched from the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel. He wasn't there to interfere, only to witness. Because some things aren't meant to be changed, only heard and remembered and let go. In the quiet unraveling of a snowy winter, a single dollar and a simple melody unraveled decades of silence, shame, and sacrifice. The story of Eliza Jennings began not on a grand stage but on a sidewalk under a flickering street lamp. She was just a child with a violin playing her heart out for strangers who mostly passed her by. Until one man, Preston Hale, a millionaire CEO hardened by success and distant from feeling stopped. And something in him shifted. That dollar wasn't just a test, it was a trigger. What followed was more than a story about music. It was about rediscovery, about mothers who give up everything, about daughters who carry dreams without even knowing the full weight of their origins. It was about the way pain ripples through generations and how love, quiet and patient, can slowly stitch things back together. Rosa Jennings had once been a prodigy, a Juilliard hopeful with brilliance in her fingers. But life rerouted her into motherhood solitude and silence, She gave up the spotlight, sold her prized violin, and worked behind the scenes for years just to keep her daughter warm and fed. She never told Eliza about the music in her own past, nor about the man who walked away before Eliza was even born. And yet, that music found its way back. Through Eliza, through a performance that silenced a room full of power brokers, through a melody that moved a man who believed he could buy anything except redemption. As Eliza grew into her own sound at the Sierra Music Conservatory, her notes became more than performance. They became memory, resistance, forgiveness. And when she learned the truth about her father, Sebastian Wilder, she didn't collapse under the weight of it. She did what only the strongest do: she turned it into art. She didn't confront him with words. She didn't beg for closure. She stood on stage and let her bow say what couldn't be spoken. Sebastian left before she finished playing, but later his letter arrived not to reclaim her, but to thank her, to honor what had grown in the absence he left behind. Preston, who once tossed $1 like a dare, left something far more valuable: silence, respect, distance. A man once defined by transactions had learned, perhaps for the first time, how to give without expectation. And Rosa, who had buried her voice so long ago, found it again, in her daughter, in herself, because love, when honest, has a sound, and healing, when patient, has a rhythm. This story reminds us of something powerful: redemption doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it shows up in quiet acts, in showing up, in walking away with grace, in letting the truth be heard even if it hurts. It also teaches us that parenthood isn't defined by biology but by presence, that art can hold space for pain we don't know how to name, and that sometimes our greatest gift to the next generation is letting go of the dreams we once carried so they can carry their own. In a world that moves fast, where value is often measured in dollars and followers, this story calls us back to the quiet things: a daughter's eyes, a mother's lullaby, a violin in winter. So, what can we take from this into our own lives? First, the power of presence. Rosa didn't have wealth, she didn't have prestige, but she had devotion. She listened, she stayed, and that made all the difference. Second, the strength of forgiveness. Not the easy kind, the hard, silent kind that doesn't need an audience, the kind that frees you, even if the other person never says sorry. Third, the courage to begin again. Whether you're a parent who gave up a dream or a child discovering one, your story isn't over. You're allowed to return to what once made your soul sing. It's never too late. If this story moved you even just a little, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to bring more stories like this to life, stories that remind us of the beauty in broken places and the music that can rise from them. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for feeling this journey with us. Until next time, keep your heart open and your ears tuned to the quiet songs of the world.